Hey, good morning everyone, and welcome to the PivotBoss Pre-Market Report for Friday, March 16th, 2018. I'm Frank Ochoa, aka PivotBoss. Here's a look at the daily time frame of the ES. Basically, we've seen price reject off the upper end of this range here on the short-term range and come back toward the center of the overall key range at 2703. This is really important here for a couple of reasons. Number one, we mentioned before that price was likely going to stay between this middle 50% of the overall range, which spans all the way down from 25.29 up to 28.79. And basically the idea was, after we had such a large impulse move, we were likely going to snap back and then form kind of a neutral key range here as it builds energy for the next major move. And so right now we've seen that pretty much play out perfectly. And throughout the week, we started the week here with a failure to hold above the previous peak high, and now we've pulled back and are holding quietly here. You can see on a 5-day ADR basis we've gotten very compressed, which signals that we could be looking at a breakout or expansion or an increase of volatility ahead. And so because of the rejection off of this edge here, the expectation would be at least a move back to the midpoint of the larger key range, which is 2703, with a likely test at this lower edge, which is back here toward 2647. So overall, this could be looking like more short-term weakness here, especially if price cannot hold this point here, about 2740s. Overall, any bounce shy of this peak here could still be a selling opportunity into 2800 for a move across the range into 2650. So again, right now working on the short-term premise that we could be headed downward toward the range, given the fact that we're just trading in a range. But overall, we continue to compress within this range, and longer term we could be looking at significant expansion down the road, but at this moment continue to be compressed in this range so far. Let's take a look here at the NQ. The NQ here also appears like it could be on the verge of a significant downside reversal. It's holding here above the upper end of its key range after the rejection. Last time it rejected hard on this low and pushed all the way back. Pulled back to the midpoint and is now pushed through the top of the key range and is held ever since. The problem here is, after you fail to see another new high very quickly, you start to see perhaps the stops come out. The weak hands give up and you start to see the downside stops come out. That would push price back to the midpoint of this range. That's 66.5375. So right now you got to see, how is price going to respond here? Can it continue to hold above 7K? If there's any failure to hold 7K, we could see a big stop run day that leads to a major move back toward, say, 68.50, 68.60, followed by any bounce leading to a continuation toward the opposite edge as low as 6600. So this could be rather significant. Now if price can continue to hold 7K, then perhaps, or any failed range expansion below 7K occurs, that could lead to another round of strength back up. And again, we're going to be talking 7300 on the top side up above. So for the most part, 7440 would be the 50% expansion target on a longer term basis if that were to be the key. So right now 7K is going to be very important for the NQ ahead. We have a very narrow, tightly coiled range on a 5-day basis, and especially on a 3-day developing basis. So we'll see how this plays out on 7K. If we take a look here at crude oil now, this one has also been compressing significantly. If you look at this range here, we've gotten even more compressed toward the apex of this range. For the most part, it's using the previous month's close as kind of the major pivot this month, trading a little below, a little above, below, above, back at it, etc. And we're sitting right at that level. So that appears to be the major pivot right now that the market's coiling around. And at some point here, we could see major expansion. And so, as I usually say, when you get this compressed and you've been trading around the apex this long, you could see a false breakout in one direction before we see a move in the opposite direction. So if we see a move up, watch that move, qualify it a little better than you may some other moves, because this move could also swing it back in the opposite direction given that the range is still very narrow. Oftentimes you can see a straight breakaway and a continuation, but you'll know those times when you see them. So just be cautious on the first move here. We could see continued chop around this range before we actually test an edge. What often happens is sometimes what we saw in silver, where for the most part you'll see this thing chop sideways and then make a big move down. Once you see rejection, it comes right back to where price had developed value and then proceeds to chop some more. So go look at silver. That's a perfect template for what could be developing here in crude oil down the road. Alright, let's take a look at gold here. Here's a look at gold. This one has been coiling up for a while. It had everything it needed to kind of push higher toward the top end of the range. It got our first target very quickly, but had to pull back quite a bit. This is what I talked about before. After you get that first target, you could see quite a bit of chop before you see a continuation. And that's why I usually favor, if you see a major rejection day, play it to the high probability target, take the money and run, and then let it chop around and then allow you to play the opposite edge should it be tested. So right now we're still working to this opposite edge here. At this moment you can also see there's a significant rounded top that's developing, and that could be significantly bearish. It could lead to expansion in either direction, but typically speaking this can lead to a downside break and move, which could put us back to both 1280 and 1240 very quickly. So this one's developing very tightly here as it continues to compress. You can see the 5-day ADR is super narrow as well. At some point here very soon we could be looking at significant expansion, likely to the downside, but any break above 1342 here will likely test this edge. So either way could be significant, but typically speaking a rounded top would normally break to the downside. So watching for those scenarios here as we continue to develop in gold. And lastly, let's take a look at Bitcoin here. Bitcoin, this one, let's zoom in a little bit here. For the most part, this one failed to really push higher on this day right there. We had the rejection day that we were looking for at the 9,000 edge. We talked about this pullback likely leading to a pushback toward value in the top edge, but it needs to see a continuation on the following day. And in this case what happened was price came up here on this day, pushed higher, and then rejected those new highs and started to push downward and eventually closed below the rejection day mid rather. And that rejection day mid is very important because for the most part, if you cannot continue to maintain acceptance above the rejection day mid, then odds favor a push through and to a new low. 9 times out of 10, 99 out of 100 times, you're going to see this thing push to a new low when you close below that rejection day mid. So that's always an indication that I look for. And one thing that can usually forecast a close below that rejection day mid is a failed new high. Both of those instances occurred and this thing pushed lower. So right now this one's having trouble here finding support. We're kind of sitting at 8K right now, and overall if this thing is going to start rolling down, remember we had that that next target below, which is in the 2000s, which could be a significant 100% target at 2100. So that's going to be a longer term target to watch for, especially if this thing cannot reestablish acceptance above 9K very soon. Alright, that's it for today. I wanted to give a quick update for premium members. We will be back to our full schedule on Monday, March 19th. So have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon. Take care.